Can you, unlike the rest of us, get to all of it? Can you watch all of these shows and do the job?
No, the volume, these all, but the volume of total shows, it's thousands. The key about the internet and Netflix is that it's not like one network, like one linear network, where you've only got 5 or 6 shows that you can put in. You can, just as you expand the audience, you can expand the number of shows.
Right. Now, I think there are a fair number of people in the audience today, young and a little older than very young, that wouldn't mind being you in some way or another, sitting atop a tech creation that is the fulfillment of their plans and dreams. And you said something very interesting. You once said, I had the great fortune of doing a mediocre job at my first company. Not everybody would view a mediocre job at their first company as a triumph or helpful. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, my first company was a tech software company, started in 1990. It got acquired in 1997. And it grew very quickly, but very chaotically, and I always felt like I was half underwater. I was not doing a very good job as a manager. The products were really good, so the sales increased, but as a leader and manager, not very effective.
What were you doing wrong?
I wasn't very honest. I was uncomfortable about being honest with people, so I valued kindness very high and consideration, and that's a good value too. But honesty is really important at work. So I'd be frustrated with you, and I wouldn't really tell you, but it would of course manifest itself. And it took me a long time to have the courage, both to be able to be an example of honesty myself, to receive it, to give it, and ultimately, of course, obviously for all of you, you're probably sitting there thinking, of course, why was that so hard? And I think part of the reason was I had never led anything when I started the company.
Now, one of the watchwords of Netflix is the balance of strategy and execution. You talk about this all the time. How do you think this through? You've had some extremely big decisions to make at Netflix. Most notable, of course, is how to shift from the distribution of DVDs to streaming, which was hard to figure out, hard to time, hard to leap across the chasm in 2-3 leaps. How do you think about that?
Sure. I mean, most of the time it's all about execution, and then on occasion it's all about strategy, so that they're both important depending on the timing. The thing that most people don't understand about strategy is pain. And if your strategy is not profoundly painful to you and uncomfortable, you're not being very strategic. So when you're strategic, it's because, say, you don't have enough troops, to use a military metaphor. If you have overwhelming force, you don't need to be strategic. You just have huge forces. But if you don't have overwhelming force, which is most of the time we are in business, it's the equivalent of saying, I'm going to put all the troops on the northern border, none on the south. I'm going to take a risk that way. But that's a strategy, and it makes you uncomfortable, because if you're wrong, you're screwed. And so really strategy is a list of all the things you're not doing.
So give me an example of this at Netflix, a really concrete example of a dilemma that had to do with strategy and execution.
So for us, one of the elements of strategy is not doing sports. So strategy is a long list of all the things we're not doing pay-per-view. Even those customers ask for it. Hey, I like you guys, the $4 pay-per-view, can't you also do it?
Right.
We don't think it's a good strategy for us to do it. Basically, the strategy bets are all the things that we're not doing. And when you have a strategy that's like to build the best product in the best hamburger store, that's like not a strategy, right? The strategy is we're only going to do hamburgers. We're not going to do French fries. I don't know if that's a good strategy, but it would be controversial.
So on sports, for example, what's your thinking on that?
Sports, is a very different dynamic, a very different marketplace. We're not trying to be a cable system replacement. We're one network that's movies and TV shows. And so sometimes people want a cable replacement, but just that's not us. Our path is to do more and more on movies, more and more on TV series.
Now, a lot of movies are now being watched. Obviously, you can watch it on your television. Your television can be enormous, but a lot of people are watching films, good films, on laptops, and I know that my sons also listen to music on their laptops, which drives me insane because they're missing so much. Do you care about that, the fact that this work, this creative work, is now being seen on something this big and sometimes something that big? Is this an issue for you?
About 2/3 of Netflix viewing is on a television, and a third is on devices, like you mentioned, laptops, phones, tablets.
Is it shifting?
2/3, not particularly. When you look at a new television, if you get one of these UHD, HDR televisions, I mean, the picture quality is incredible. The colors, the depth, it's significantly better than what you get in the movie theater.
Right.
So, it's really incredible what's happening in home screens. For $1,000, you get a 50, 60-inch screen that's amazing.
You've got on November 4th a new show, The Crown, that Peter Morgan is doing, and that adds to an extraordinary range of programming that you've already got. I sometimes go on Netflix and I'm kind of frozen because there's so much there, and God forbid I go on certain other opportunities and feel a similar thing. It's often talked about in your world that there's a bubble, that we're now there's so much being spent on original production that it's kind of dazzling or bedazzling the viewer, that the options are out of control, that there is a bubble, and it's inevitable that the market for both attention and fees will cause a contraction. Do you expect that to happen?
Cable networks like FX and broadcast networks like ABC are continuing to invest in shows, and now Amazon and Netflix are adding into that. So the total number of shows over the last 5 years produced has nearly doubled to a little over 400. And so some people say that's unsustainable. The writers say, fantastic.
No, it's a great
There's never
boon for
been
them.
more people working. The prices are up. The ecosystem's incredibly healthy. But it's a tougher competition for all of the existing players. But I don't think it's a bubble. I think what's happening is distribution is getting better, and then that can afford better content. So if you think about the highest-end movies, the budget will be about $150 million for production, so about $100 million per hour of content. If you think about the very biggest TV, Game of Thrones, The Crown that you mentioned, then it's about $10 million per hour in production budget. Now, what's the difference? Well, the movie is able to monetize through incredible distribution and still make a profit, even though they spend $100 million for an hour of content. TV, we can't do that. We can't yet afford $100 million an hour. We're still at 10. And so what we're all interested in is how do we expand, not call it a bubble, but expand and invest more and figure out what does $20 million an hour television look like, with twice the budget of our HBO's biggest shows per hour. And we're not sure. And obviously you can waste the money, but we're interested in both in sort of seeing what can you do with that kind of budget now that distribution is getting stronger.
Right. Talk about quality for a second. I have to say, if I were a critic today, I would much rather be a television critic than a movie critic, and I'm a movie fanatic, both high and low. It's very much the experience when we're scheduling reviews for a particular week that we're scrambling for a movie or two that Anthony Lane will possibly find interesting. I mean, there's a lot of junk. Unless you're a really big fan of Marvel Comics, of superheroes, and a couple of other genres, that the movie industry of the old traditional studios are becoming more and more risk-averse. At the same time, the talent is gravitating toward television. I know a lot of people in Hollywood who have basically given up on films because the ratio of meetings to successful films is so high, whereas they get yes from television. Are you worried about the movie industry?
Oh, it's a real tragedy.
You seem crushed.
The theater. No. I mean seriously. The movie theaters are strangling the movie business. Okay, so there's no innovation in distribution in movie theaters in the last 50 years. Okay,
what should they be doing?
Well, if you look at the television side, there have been the rise of cable networks, okay, compared to the original ABC, CBS. There was this huge explosion of cable networks, and now this explosion in internet networks. So there's a lot more money pouring in, okay, money and innovation. And now we don't have to do 22-minute episodes, right? Sometimes there's 16, and sometimes there's 32, and sometimes the characters take strange twists, and you can do much more with the internet distribution. But even cable distribution over broadcast was a massive innovation that brought in HBO and the incredible work that they used to do and continue to do. So huge innovation there. On the movie side, strangled by the movie theaters. You know, you can't distribute a movie directly to consumers or they, you know, strike against your movie. And so they've got a lockhold on the movie studios. And so that's driven basically flatline revenue, lack of innovation. Only the big ticket movies, the small movies, which would be better distributed both in the theaters and home, are prevented. So, you know, it's strangling that business, which is why there's so much innovation on the TV.
So if you were in charge of that business, what would you do? What strategic
Well, the problem is
each
each movie studio would like to break the oligopoly of the movie theaters, and they don't know how, because they're not allowed to cooperate, you know, against the movie theaters. Mm-hmm. That's antitrust. And if they go first, their films get killed. And then their talent is like, whoa, you sacrifice my film for this big strategic objective. That's not fair. So that's why it's a bad dynamic where, again, the movie theater union, it's called NATO, ironically, it's got a lockhold on it.
Donald Trump is against it.
Yeah,
apparently.
Here we go.
Okay. Now,
the obligatory Donald Trump reference.
It took us only 15 minutes, so I thought it was okay. By the way, Donald Trump, good or bad for the economy if he wins?
It's so bad for America if he wins. It's secondary on the economy.
Okay, fair enough. That's called a smattering of applause. Somewhat disappointing where I sit, but okay. Now, you talked about strategy of Netflix. One of probably the overwhelming strategy of Netflix is globalization. You are trying to become and you already are, a global brand in the way that some others fail to do for various reasons that we can get into. Where are you running it? Where is it most congenial, and where is the opposite? Where is it toughest, and why? On issues both economic and cultural and political. All those three.
You know, it's gone well for us in most of the world. So Western Europe's been incredibly strong. Latin America started difficult for us. We didn't have the right payment systems. We didn't have some key infrastructure. But now Brazil, Argentina, Chile, it's all Mexico. It's all doing extremely well. Asia's the newest market for us there. So we're in about 9 months. And in some of the Asian markets like Korea, we're in language. But in Vietnam, we're only in English. So, you know, we're not yet really kicked off in a big way in much of Asia.
So the real complexity is China?
Well, we're not in China. That's the one place.
But how do you get in there? What prevents it? What's
we're not sure. I mean, Disney, who's very good at China, had their movie service closed down about 6 months ago in China. Apple, who's very good in China, had their movie service closed down about 6 months ago. So it doesn't look good.
So you're staying away from it?
I don't know, but we're figuring our way out. But we're really focused on the rest of the world. There's so much opportunity for us in India and Poland and Turkey and Latin America and Vietnam. So that's what we're focused on.
So if I'd gone to you early in your DV distribution days at Netflix and things were going fine, it would have been very hard to envision where you're sitting now and the world that we're sitting in now. But I'm going to ask you to try. If we look out 5 years from now, God forbid even 10 years from now, how is your business and how is the distribution of, I hate this word to my soul, but I'll use it, content, going to look? How are our living rooms, if we have living rooms, going to look in terms of the way we watch films, programs of all kind? How will it change?
Well, I think the internet will be pretty stable like electricity. Some things come and go quickly like DVD, but some things like electricity, you know, been 130 years and continued. So I think the internet and streaming will be like electricity, so long-term stability. I think the art forms will continue to evolve. If you look over the last 10 years, you get more things like Breaking Bad and House of Cards. But that's a continued exploration of new forms. I think we'll have probably a lot more diversity on screen. You know, that's been a strong thing for Netflix over the last few years. You get a lot more global programming. So, you know, we're taking some of the best Danish content and exporting it around the world, like The Killing. We're taking, you know, some of the best UK, you know, like The Crown.
But I mean technologically. In other words, as our as our rooms get smarter, as we have smart homes and all the rest? How will that influence
Technologically, you're going to have beautiful screens. That $1,000 screen I talked about will be $200.
And virtual reality, for example, is that something that interests you as
I think at least for the next 5 years, that's really a gaming format. So if you have a PS4 and you use it a lot, you'll use VR.
As a mass form, you don't think films and, as they call it, immersive programming is going to take off? That we're going to look at it like 3D movies at a certain point? It's a kind of niche thing.
It's its own art form in virtual reality that people are just trying to figure out. But I don't. Putting movies in isolating 3D glasses is not going to be a big use. The movies and TV shows will be on great screens. All the screens are internet connected now, but that's just continuation of the same. And so I don't think that any more than gaming changed TVs and movies, that right. I don't think VR will.
A few years ago, your partner in programming, Ted Sarandos, said something that I'm not quite sure what he means, although it sounds fantastic. The goal is for us to become HBO faster than HBO can before us.
Can become us.
Can become us. My typing is terrible. Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. Look, we love HBO. We admire them. And just to be mentioned in the same sentence with them, makes our heart flutter. They have transformed so much over the last 40 years of entertainment. About 5 or 6 years ago, they were starting to get into online with HBO Go and HBO Now and these things. And we were starting to do original programming. So that's where that quote became. So interesting. And they've done great work again getting online. And now in more and more countries, in Mexico, in Colombia, in the Netherlands, they look like us from a business model, direct to consumer over the internet. In many countries like the U.S., they've got long-term agreements with linear distributors, so that it's harder for them to do that. But everyone sees in the entertainment business, wow, in 10 or 15 years, this is all internet distribution.
Right.
And so whether it's CBS doing All Access or HBO, there's a tremendous transformation, which is literally linear TV as we have today will not be watched in 10 or 20 years, any more than you don't use your fixed line phone. You may still have a fixed line phone, but you so rarely use it compared to your mobile phone.
And yet the reception is better. Who knows? Something I still don't understand. So you, like Amazon, Netflix and Amazon, have a view of long-term growth and a satisfaction for the time being, at least, with breaking even as opposed to paying primary attention to short-term profits, as opposed to other tech companies. How do you view this in strategic terms? Who's right and who's wrong, and what are the risks?
I think each business model's a little unique. You're right that currently, right now, both Amazon and Netflix are running at break-even and are both highly valued, which is a testament to capitalism being actually quite long-term. So our investors and Amazon's investors do want profits, but they are believing in the long-term profitability, and so they pay a lot for both of our stocks. Mm-hmm. Other companies like Apple are hugely profitable already, and that works for them. So I don't know if there's any one right model. But the fact that you can be break-even in Netflix's case and a $40 billion market cap, again, is testament to long-term investors.
In June, The Times published a piece that gave enormous credit to Netflix for its growth and its innovation and its original programming, but at the same time landed on a paragraph that poses perhaps what at least the author, Joe Nocera, thought was the potential dilemma. And he wrote this: "At the moment, Netflix has a negative cash flow of $1 billion. It regularly needs to go to the debt market to replenish its coffers. Its $6.8 billion in revenue last year pales in comparison to the $28 billion or so at media giants like TW and 21st Century Fox. And for 20th Century Fox. And for all the original shows Netflix has underwritten, it remains dependent on the very networks that fear its potential to destroy their long-term business model in the way that internet competitors undermine the newspaper and music industries. And now that so many entertainment companies see it as an existential threat, the question is whether Netflix can continue to thrive in the new TV universe that it has brought into being." That's a mouthful, but there's a lot in there to answer.
Basically, the mouthful says Netflix is a shining star today, but there's all these issues. And what's great is in the New York Times in 2010, you can look up an article called A Falling Star, which is basically the same argument, that this can't keep going. And it's possible that it doesn't, but, we don't really focus on that stuff, right? We focus on how do we do better shows, how do we do better streaming, how do we make the service, UI better. So every day we get up and try to think, how do we improve so that we grow? And I don't know how big it will be. We'll see. But, ultimately, we're not trying to predict the future. We're trying to invent it. And so we're just trying to make incredible shows, entertain people, and then, eventually the stock will be what the stock's going to be.
How do you view your competitors like YouTube or Facebook? What competitive advantages do they have versus you and vice versa?
Well, you could think about our competition broadly as everything on a screen. That you do, like YouTube is time that you're not on Netflix. Facebook is time you're not on Netflix. Linear cable is certainly a big time that you do that's not on Netflix. But there's so many competitors that way that it doesn't behoove us to really think that hard about them. We're not going to do anything about what their courses are. So when you've got a really broad array of competitors, the right thing to do is not spend much time on them because it just won't help you. And instead, what you got to focus on is, your own business and how do you grow it. And that's in contrast to, say, when there were the Blockbuster wars of 10 years ago with us and Blockbuster, there was one big competitor, and then, we really knew everything about them. Then it was good to know the opponent. But again, now our competition is just so broad.
So what keeps you up at night? What makes you anxious? I'm running The New Yorker with my friends and colleagues, and there are any number of issues that are obvious to all about print and websites and mobile apps and radio and podcast, all the many new varieties of things that we have to be great at, both creatively, financially, and strategically. So I wake up with a knot in my stomach. Happily. What causes you to do that? Or are you very zen about it all?
What keeps me up at late at night is watching Luke Cage.
Yeah.
We're on, if you think of your industry, it was very stable for 200 years. And the right thing to do for most of the both paper magazine, paper newspaper industry was just do a little bit better reporting, a little bit better ad sales, right? Because the basic things were very stable. And then there's now this huge change in your business for the internet. That was true for us in the DVD days. In DVD days, I woke up and those kind of, But
so you feel very secure and hunky-dory now?
Now it's execution. It's how do we have, the basic idea of you all give us your money, thank you for that, and then it's up to us to turn that money into joy. And we have to do that better and better. And if we create shows that you love, you'll continue to pay us. And so we get up and think every day that we got billions of dollars that the customers are giving us, and we have to turn that into joy. And that's this movie and that show, and that's hard work, right? But that's our focus, is to do that better and better. And so that's why it's not a strategic dilemma. It's more of a how well can we execute on that.
So you don't see anything behind the hills a year, 2 years, 5 years that could be obliterating or really worrying to you now? You don't have.
No, I'm very confident in the next 10 or 15 years, our growth of movie and TV shows, internet streaming. Now, in the long term, of course, Netflix, like every business, will face a threat. And someday, movies and TV shows will be boring and old, like the opera, or the novel.
Kind of like the opera and the novel.
But you're old. At some point, new forms of entertainment will supplant movies and TV shows. Right. And then Netflix will have a threat. Now, if that threat is digitally based, it's something you do on a screen, then we've got pretty good chance of being able to figure that out and, similar skill set kind of thing. But to the degree that the substitute for what we offer is, say, pharmacological, and you take a little blue pill that's very personalized medicine, and then you have an incredible movie in your head, and whenever you want, you take a white pill that brings you right back, then that's unlikely for us to be...
It's called acid.
Unlikely that we'll be successful at pioneering that new format, right? So in that case is Kodak. So Kodak was the leader in photography, and what really replaced them was Facebook. And it's just such a different value source. It's not really digital cameras that separates them, right? It's Facebook. And Instagram. So that was never going to be, that was too hard a difference. Whereas if it's electric engines, you could see that, Mercedes or Ford or others may be able to do electric cars. That's close enough. So it depends on what the future threat is for us.
Reed, thank you very much.
Great pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. Well done.